Yeah.
It's so good to see you. I'll tell Melissa that I saw
Yeah,
you.
please tell her I said
Okay. It is 1:30 and the Commissioners Court of Brazos County will hold a public hearing pursuant to Texas Health and Safety Code 364.012 to consider the ordinance prohibiting solid waste disposal in certain areas of Brazos County and an ordinance designating areas in Brazos County where the municipal solid waste disposal is not prohibited pursuant to the Health and Safety Code, Section 364.012, and prohibiting solid waste disposal in other areas. Any ordinance which is adopted will also specify an area within the county and solid waste disposal is not prohibited. Any interested person may attend and testify at the hearing. And it is 1:30, and we are here in the Commissioner's Courtroom, 200 South Texas Avenue, Suite 106. So I think most of y'all already understand where we're going with this. This is to designate a location for the for a landfill. And we have to do that. We have to give the option of a place for a landfill according to statute. The purpose certainly is not to try to get a landfill put in that location, but it is, we have to do that. And having it on county-owned land is, in my opinion, the best scenario that a county could have. And I've talked to a lot of county judges that wish they had the position we have, where we have acreage that's county-owned, that they could also do the same thing. I mean, I've had them tell me that they've tried to do this in other areas on private land, and then it kind of blew up on them, and they still are wide open for having landfills put in. And so we really are. We're in a good spot with the county owning that land on Kathy Fleming. I'm gonna ask Eric McGee. He's the outside counsel who's actually drafted the ordinance, and he's done this sort of thing for a lot of counties, and so he understands what the statute is well. And I'm going to ask him to come up and tell us a little more about it, and open the floor to you.
Thanks, Judge. Thanks, Commissioners. As you know, you've probably seen me speak a lot of times at conferences about regulatory authority that counties have. And so just to make sure that we're all clear, landfills are permitted by the state of Texas, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, or TCEQ. That's the agency that actually permits, license, or files registrations for landfill or solid waste disposal. And that's all found in the Health and Safety Code. Counties are different and unique, as we all know, from cities who have lots of different kinds of zoning and regulatory authority that counties do not have. So the legislature created Chapter 364.012 of the Health and Safety Code and said, in order for a county to prohibit solid waste disposal in its county, it must first designate somewhere where it would not be prohibited. That doesn't mean that it would ever be allowed on that spot, because that's not a decision that the Commissioners Court makes. That's a decision that the TCEQ makes. But first, the landfill company that wants to develop a solid waste disposal site must access the property either by purchase. They don't have condemnation authority. They don't have any kinds of taking authority that they could ever take the property. So whether it be the county or a private landowner, they would first be required to purchase the property and then in turn have it processed through the application process at the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, and there may be problems with it at that point. There's counties around here that in the dark of night, landfill companies came in and purchased a piece of property and put a landfill on that site once it got permitted by the TCEQ. And there's not really anything a county or a citizens' right group can do at that point. Once the application's on file, that's up to the TCEQ to make those determinations. Counties have certainly fought, and citizens' right group have fought the development of landfills. I will tell you the far majority of them have been unsuccessful. There have been one or two that's been successful based on floodplains or underwater groundwater or other things like that, but that's just a rarity. The story I tell at conferences, which is one that I will tell here, is a family that had been around since the 1800s, had a very large portion of land that through the years has been divided up amongst their many descendants, and it was still all owned within multi-generational family relationships. There is a landfill on that property today because one of the cousins that had no relationship really with any of the family members, and we're talking 4 or 5 generations down, didn't live in the county, wasn't familiar with the county, signed a confidentiality agreement with a company who came in and did testing for 18 months. Nobody's knowledge what was being done there. Nobody even knew that something was being done. The first time their own relatives, who were all adjoining property owners, and all the other neighbors out in that area learned of it was when the application was filed at the TCEQ and that 30-day notice went out. And so that's why counties, I always encourage counties to go ahead and designate somewhere where it's not prohibited and say the rest of the county it is prohibited, because that requires a landfill company to come to you first and tell you, we would like to have a solid waste landfill. And in your case, you couldn't ask for a better situation because you actually own the property. So you don't even have to worry about a third party or private citizen owning the property that would have to turn it away. So this is essentially the best of both worlds. The prime situation that you would want in the county is if you already had an existing landfill, and that's the one you would designate as where it would not be prohibited. Brazos County just doesn't have that, and we did a lot of extensive research just looking at areas, and this has been in the process probably, I don't know, for a year and a half or something when I first came over and addressed the commissioner's court. So that's the history behind how we came up with this piece of property and where we looked at all those things. The statute 364.012 actually requires that a county take this step. And then before the commissioner's court can actually adopt an ordinance, whether that be today or at some future commissioner's court meeting, it is required that it be published in the newspaper for 2 weeks, 30 days prior to taking the action. And I know that's been done in this case because I have the newspaper notices that have been published in the newspaper. So I'm here to answer any questions about the ordinance itself, but it really follows the statutory language and the discussions that we had. And I was at there was a citizens meeting that I attended where I know you did an excellent job addressing a lot of the concerns and questions that were there.
Okay.
Judge, can I ask a question? Is it my understanding?
Why don't you come up to the microphone, Carla?
Thank you for that. Carlisle Fraser. Is it my understanding then, if the county didn't have that designated spot on Kathy Fleming Road in our county, if a private entity came in and bought 500 acres, I assume to be smart, they would have done some environmental testing ahead of time before they bought that 500 acres?
Well, sure, I'll answer that question. I probably didn't do a good job explaining my situation about the family members. I always say I don't think she was ever invited back to another family reunion, was probably my guess. But what they actually do is sign a conditional real estate contract to purchase and make that person sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, and pay them an upfront amount. So typically what happens is it actually makes the property where the solid waste disposal landfill go become much more valuable than it's actually worth if we would just hired a real estate appraiser to go appraise that property. So let's say, just simple math here, I'm not a mathematician, but 500 acres, if it was worth $5 million, right? They will negotiate that purchase price for 2 years from now, make them sign an NDA and a confidentiality agreement while they go out there and run all of the environmental testing, groundwater testing, floodplain, anything else that they need to know about, and they may go ahead and pay you $1.2 million now for that 2-year period that your property can't be used and for your silence. And then once they get that conditional approval from TCEQ, once they've cleared all their hurdles internally for putting that application together and doing all those environmental studies, engineering, development permits, then at the end of that, assuming TCEQ issues that permit, then you get your $5 million too. So instead you wound up making like $6.2 million because they bought your silence up front as a confidentiality and a NDA.
So just to be clear, that private entity would lock up the property to be able to go do their testing, but they would go to TCEQ to have them approve it. They wouldn't go to a third party to go do environmental testing.
Correct. Well, they can have their own third parties. They usually bring them from out of state or from Dallas or Austin or wherever, and they may bring them in to do whatever it is, groundwater testing or whatever they seek to do out there. It would not be anybody locally that they use. And if you don't put this in place, this type of ordinance where since the county owns the property and that requires a landfill company to come to the county first, you would never know that they're here or that they've been looking for areas around this area to put a landfill in.
Does this imply that the landfill on Kathy Fleming Road had previously gone through TCEQ and it was approved as environmentally safe?
So the Commissioner's Court does not have the ability to look at what I say suitability, right? So there's a portion that had been out there on Kathy Fleming Road, but you have to remember when you look back through the TCEQ records, especially where there were things from the 1940s, 50s, 60s, all the way back, the law and the technology has changed so much that requires liners and certain amount of clay, certain amount of moisture in the ground, all these kinds of things so that you're not setting up a problem of where it would fail to begin with. The TCEQ, for example, in a floodplain would probably not put a landfill in a floodplain because of the potential that it would flood. But there has been a case where engineers have come in and built berms and redirected the way that that floodplain would look in order to squeeze a landfill in a particular little area. Now that's all unheard of and probably rarer than, that's the exception to the rule, but there has been a granting of those types of situations. So even though you think in your mind a landfill could never go in this portion of the county because it's flood prone, I've seen engineers do fantastic feats to get themselves in, especially if the need is a 50, 60, $100 million business, which that's what landfill companies make. I mean, when you look at that projected, their long-term existence over the next 50 years, that's, you know.
I believe it. So somebody who is industrious, who really wanted to have a private landfill come into our area, what if they felt like, let me go test Kathy Fleming Road, get some engineers to go in there and see if that really fits as a landfill? Could they fight it if they found out that it was unsuitable environmentally?
No,
they couldn't.
Probably not, because we're not making a determination as to whether or not a particular piece of property meets the requirements of all of the TCEQ regulations. Now, there are circumstances that you would always want to be careful about, like where it's just prohibited on its core right next door to an airport. So, I mean, the county should never go out there and designate a piece of property that's next door to an airport, because the TCEQ's rules and regulations themselves say it can't be next door to an airport or within X number of feet of an airport. This is, even if under these circumstances, if they came out there and said, we don't think Kathy Fleming is a viable option, they still have to come to the Commissioner's Court or sue us somehow, because we would have the ordinance already in place.
You answered my question.
Okay.
Thank you
You're welcome.
very much.
Eric,
Thanks, Carl.
in layman's terms, this is saying, if we adopt this, it's saying that no one can come into Brazos County and put in a landfill, period.
Correct.
That's the layman's term.
Right.
That's easy enough.
That's
Okay.
easy enough.
And
Okay.
there will be no surprises, because like what happened with the family, because they have to come to the county, so nobody can come in the dark at night, do what they do, and
Correct.
then all of a sudden, because the county would be has to be notified first.
Correct.
How many other counties in the state?
Come up to the microphone.
We have to record all of this.
Just give us your name and,
Lyons.
You have to speak into the mic, please.
I'm Gail Lyons. I'm from Milliken.
Can't hear you.
You still can't hear me?
No.
just pull that little mic down. There. Thank you, Gail.
Gail
Thank you.
Lyons
There you
from
go.
Milliken. How many other counties in the state have adopted the same type of proposal?
That's a very good question. And I will tell you, there's no tracking mechanism like where you can go to the TCEQ and look them up. But I can tell you that there's 254 counties in Texas. I know of at least 50 or more that have done them, whether they necessarily hired us or not, but just when I've been doing this process since about 2012, I would say. And just within the past 12 calendar months, y'all would be like the 5th county that I've done. because I talk about it at a conference, and then they hear from their peers when they go to a conference. Then all of a sudden it's like, we're getting a landfill, and we are a target zone. I will, and it's not scare tactics, but I will tell you, there was one that was attempted to be developed along the border of Texas, and one of the things that they were proposing to do, and that the TCEQ had temporarily approved, was the acceptance of McKeough waste. That's not waste generated in the United States or in Texas. That's waste that comes across the border on railroad cars and then is dumped in the U.S.
Wow.
That county and that citizens' right group fought that and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, and the luck of the draw had a flood that flooded the entire landfill site, and the excuse was that was a 500-year flood, and literally 3 months later, the exact same thing happened again. And so the TCEQ had to put everything on pause there, and then that landowner, in that case, was building the landfill next door to his cousin's driveway. He was going to have to redesign the entire landfill, and it became cost prohibitive at that point to put it in a different portion of his land. But that's one of about 2 or 3 that have been successful in actually fighting the landfill off. But for the most part, most counties have had to rely on looking at areas where it would be very, not prohibitive, but very difficult to put a landfill. When you look at the major thoroughfares here in Brazos County, I always say, when I'm giving the same speech to a county who's looking at it, I always say, okay, find the farm to market road, then turn off that onto the county road. Go to that county road's dead end, and then turn on the dirt road that's still a county road, and let's go to the dead end of that road, and let's talk to that landowner and see if they would be willing for us to designate that as an area where it's not prohibitive. Because a landfill could certainly go back there, but transportation costs alone almost make it unfathomable. So then that still makes the landfill company, although the county wouldn't own the property like here, it still makes them come to the commissioner's court and say, can we designate somewhere else, And then that puts it all up in full transparency for all citizens to see, and the commissioner's court to know before any type of decision would ever be made for that. But I wish I had an exact number. I've tried to research that, and I have my personal list of the ones I know have it, and I'm sure there's more out there that I'm just not aware of.
Okay, thank you, Eric. And I've got you listed up here. Do you want to speak? Come on up.
All right. Get my notes here. Glasses.
Pull my, yeah, there you go.
I'm Ann Lyons. I am a member of the Milliken community. We own property, and part of that property adjoins the county property that we're speaking of. So I have a concern. I don't know that this court can solve this concern or not. I left the meeting that we had in Milliken after hearing what you had said, I left with this concern. And I appreciate the fact that I can express this. And I'll do the best I can at expressing it. I was a teacher for many years. And so I think what's really important is the historical perspective of this landfill. And so, as a teacher, I want to share with you some. Do I have a time limit?
No, go ahead.
Okay, all right. I'll try to be brief. I'd like to share with you the history as I remember it. Back in the 70s and 80s, Milliken became sort of a dumping ground. It was a place where people would drop off their garbage in certain areas, sofas, refrigerators, you name it, it was dropped off. Oil Field Road was one of those roads. It's now called Kathy Fleming Road. It was a mess. as was some other places around the Milliken area. What was formed was an organization called Don't Mess with Milliken. We were a part of Don't Mess with Texas. And in fact, we won an award that was presented to us in Austin for our endeavors to clean up Milliken. And that happened back probably in the early 80s. So we did go and we picked up trash, and we picked up trash down Kathy Fleming Road and other places to clean up Milliken. And then the court, the commissioner's court, was asked what they could do about it. There was land that they could purchase, which is the land that we're talking about now. They purchased that property, and they, friendly court, wanted to do something for Milliken, and they provided us with a landfill. And that was a good thing for Milliken, that we had a landfill. But other communities came and they brought their trash as well. And I don't know how it was monitored, but old cars ended up there, dead animals ended up there, gas and other hazardous materials, paint, so forth, you name it, it was dumped there. Then there were regulations, and I guess the landfill was checked, and the leachate was suspect. And we heard thoughts of the fact that it could contaminate the water area and the land in the area. And so it was closed. I think it was probably cost prohibitive for the county to do anything about it. And so it was covered with dirt, and the problem is still there. It's just covered with now grass and dirt and so forth. We don't know how far and wide the leachate had traveled, or the contaminants have traveled in that area. But this is the land now that we're talking about, the land that is available for this ordinance. I know that there's going to be some collateral damage from this ordinance, or I feel it is, because you have addressed the fact that property values might drop, and that there is something within the ordinance that says that the commissioner's court can control that it may not drop below 25%, if I've read it right. So that's the collateral damage of this ordinance. You have said that, or I've read, that this action before the court is strictly to protect the county from future landfill developments. And my concern is, what are you doing to protect the people of Milliken? The property values perhaps will drop, but more so, I understand that you are a very friendly court, and I hear your concerns about Milliken, but I don't see any protection of us beyond this court, and that's my concern.
Okay, so let me respond back to how we're protecting Milliken. The only place in Brazos County is that 115 acres that could be a landfill. So everything else at Milliken is protected. And really, because the county owns that 115 acres, more or less, the county would make that decision whenever, if somebody wanted to put one in here, then the county makes that decision. And I can't speak for any future court. All I can speak for is the court I'm sitting on right now, and I'll assure you that nobody up here is going to want to do anything like that.
And I appreciate that, and I understand that, but my concern is beyond this court.
So beyond, if this doesn't happen, then Brazos County, including Milliken, is wide open. And if someone comes in here and buys whatever the acreage is, and and gets an application from TCEQ, there's nothing that anybody, whether it's Milliken or the Commissioner's Court, future Commissioner's Court, can do about it. This is the only way that the Commissioner's Court will have a say-so about any future landfill, is by designating a location. And this just happens to be a good location only because Brazos County owns it. There's plenty, and Eric kind of spoke to some of the issues that other counties have had when somebody else owned property that they were trying to deal with. And I've talked to other county judges that's what they tried to do. They didn't own enough property somewhere to actually designate for the county to own that property. And it all kind of fell apart. I mean, some of the family was willing and wanted to, and they thought they were going to get it designated, and then one family member said no, it wasn't going to happen, and it all fell apart. And he told me he just wished they owned the acreage that they could designate it so that they could get it done, and then it wouldn't have to worry about somebody coming into their county and creating a landfill that they have no control over. So this isn't to put a landfill at Milliken. It is to try to control it, whether that everything except that 115 acres is prohibited. Everything except that 115 acres. And the only way that 115 acres could ever be used for a landfill is if the county, some future Commissioner's Court, sold it to be designated. But that's an easy, if you don't have it, then you don't have that protection. You don't have that Commissioner's Court that y'all have all participated in the elections and put into office, and you can call and you can email and come down and speak, get public hearings. You don't have that option if this isn't in place.
And I understand that, and I thank you for that, but you've also heard my concern.
Sure, sure. I hear you, and for me, it's a worse concern for Milliken or anybody else in the county if we don't put it in place. But I appreciate that. I mean, I hear your concerns.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Ann, thank you. Ann was the only one that actually wrote to come up and speak, but I'll open it up if anybody else wants to. Lynn, come on up.
Judge and Commissioners, I sincerely appreciate you doing this today. Without that, Judge, we the residents of Milliken area, might have been in a real wreck in a few more years. And so I want you to know that I appreciate what you have done and what you're continuing to do to try to preserve the values. One other thing I wanted to mention, Milliken Salt Dome is within 4,000 feet of the surface. Did you guys know, did y'all know that there's a salt dome there? That landfill sits on top of a salt dome, and the salt has risen up to where it's 4,000 feet under the surface, which potentially causes some real problems in the future. Because around salt domes, you typically have faults and fracturing. And there's one at Milliken we ran into when we were drilling wells out there that was like 600 feet of throw in that salt dome. So there are going to be all kinds of tricky things happening that could cause contamination if you had more than what's already out there in the way of waste. So thank you very much. Judge, I really appreciate you doing this. I know you didn't have to do it. You could have sat quietly in silence, and it might have happened. So thank you very much. We appreciate everything you've done today.
Thank you, Lynn. And thank you for all your help putting the meeting together down there that we had at Milliken. Is there anybody else that would like to speak? Well, if there's nobody else, then just before I close this, though, we will have it on the agenda next week with this ordinance, and I would expect it to pass. So we'll see how that goes. But with that said, we're ready, unless anybody on the court wants to speak. Anybody want to say anything?
No, sir.
Okay. Well, it's 2:01 and we'll adjourn. Thank you.